What's up, Data Transformers? This is Bolaji, and welcome to the Data Careers Show, the show where we watch analytics engineers, data analysts, and data scientists transform their career. Today, we are talking to an analytics and data science leader who is passionate about finance, tech, and data. He runs the Singapore local DBT meetups. He co-wrote the very first Chinese DBT book together with our friends at the Taipei local DBT meetup. He's lived in 10 cities, 5 different countries. Help me welcome the Michael Han, head of product at Infinite Lambda in Singapore. Welcome, Michael.
Hey, thanks. Glad to be here.
You've been doing some really cool things, and we're curious to learn exactly how you've built this amazing career. So thank you for spending time with us today, Michael. I love to start by walking people through your recent job titles. Currently, you are head of product at Infinite Lambda. What does Infinite Lambda do?
We're a data consultancy. We help enterprises and large companies mostly, but also sometimes small startups and scale-ups with their data stacks. DBT is one of our largest partners in this. A lot of times it's about helping large enterprises adopt DBT and also just a general modern data stack, right? So Snowflake, Fivetran, that kind of stuff.
Yes. You've had some pretty cool job titles, Michael. You've had titles like principal, head of data intelligence, lead data science at the Grab Financial Group, senior product analyst. Michael, could you walk us through some of the recent job titles and how they brought you to this point where you are head of product at Infinite Lambda?
Sure, yeah. So actually got lucky at a lot of these big trends, right? So like 2017, 2018, analytics and data science was really taking off, particularly in Singapore and this part of the world. So I basically transitioned my career from traditional finance job into data analytics. And then everyone in analytics wanted to kind of move into more complex things. We started doing a lot more like experimentation and growth testing, things like that. Probably then transitioned into a data science role where we're running a lot of experiments. That was also that big trend in late 2018, 2019. And then when I became a people manager, I joined a startup, and that was when I first started using DBT. So really about this platformized data stack and helping sort of my team adopt this relatively new thing in APAC, right? So it was more popular in the US. But when we were setting our team up in like 2022, it was very new here. We didn't have any meetups. It was used in only a few places. Most of the teams were using the open source version. And then I really got involved in the community here and the community online. Actually met the CEO of the company, Infinite Lambda, through one of the meetups. Yeah, and that's how I got my current role.
Phenomenal. So this whole division of responsibilities between data scientist, analyst, analytics engineer, how did you know which of those really suited your personality and your skill set?
Yeah, so I got started as a quant. Really in the statistics kind of things. Tech was just a skill that you needed, and there was also something that I was really interested in, like Python, SQL type of stuff. And so getting into the analytics and data science was taking those hard skills that I had and then applying it to a more product. And that was kind of what a lot of people were transitioning into. Most of my colleagues from that period that were mid-career transition folks came from all sorts of backgrounds. A lot of people were BA people or more forensic accounting, really good with the SQL stuff, and a lot of people from more research-driven backgrounds, medical research and stuff like that. Because there wasn't really any data roles back then. 10, 12 years ago, most people, when you think about data role, you're thinking about like a DBA, and it was like pretty unsexy, right? Not saying that it is. I'm just as a graduating university student thinking about database administrator. I really want to optimize that Oracle cluster or whatever. And then it just gradually became more and more interesting as a tech, more and more sophisticated. Then analytics engineering, I knew it existed before DBT, but it really became a trend when DBT really got popular and then became a separate thing where You had people who's had a lot of skills in data modeling, a lot of skills in some software engineering background, and married those in developing this data models, which become a really powerful way combined with other analytics tools that were getting popular to do self-serve. And luckily for me, it coincided with when I became a manager. So it was a great way for me to help my team become more productive, more scalable.
Yeah, that's exciting. And I'm curious because, Michael, you talked about people coming into this field from different backgrounds. You were a quant before you became a data scientist. When did you fall in love with data?
When I was in college, I actually started doing a little bit of algo trading, but not on stock market. It was actually in video game goods. Back then, it was like Diablo had real money trading. So you can buy and sell Diablo items. Those things was really interesting. I was like, oh, how can you price these things accurately? I actually wrote my undergrad and master's thesis on it. It was more of a hobby. I actually didn't plan to go to join a quant firm when I graduated. I was planning to do more of a traditional finance role.
Okay.
But it was quite funny actually, because it was like 2013. I did my master's in the UK. I was going to start at this traditional finance company, and they were going to send me to Nigeria because I wanted to do some more exciting post. And then they closed down the office, so I couldn't go. So they were like, oh, well, we're going to send you to Cairo instead. And then the Cairo office closed and they rescinded my offer. So I had to find something to do.
Wow.
So I was really scrambling, and there was a startup doing trading. So okay, I'll take that job. And but then from that point on, really got into that field.
That's incredible. That's incredible. I'm fascinated by these sliding doors moments in our lives where it's like things could have gone at the fork in the road. You could have gone either way. It's almost like a coin toss. And then the path that you chose, it's blossomed into what we see before us today. I'd love to shift into getting some insight into the day-to-day of your job.
Yeah, so a good chunk of my time is spent on working with clients or potential clients on what that project might look like. So like sales and business development and or architecture, really scoping out, hey, what is it that you need to do? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? How can we help you? Framing these things out. Almost rest of the time is going to be spent either working on a POC or working with the team on technical implementation of those things. So it's really split evenly between those sides.
Okay. And I'm curious as to what your broader data team might look like. What are some of the roles? How's the team set up?
As a consultancy, or most of our team is data practitioners. 50% of our engineering team are analytics engineers, and then 30% data engineers. Rest are a combination of more traditional software engineering, backend engineering, and data scientists that are working on POC or advanced applications.
Okay. So one of the fun things that we love to ask, you've got a lot of successes. You got a lot of hits, Michael, in your career thus far. Congratulations to you. But we want to see the other side of the coin. We want to hear about some of the data disasters. So do you have any stories that you're able to share of some disasters that you had to work through? We'd love to see your thought process.
Yeah, one that haunts me a lot is when I was in one of my first jobs. Basically, indexing was off by one day in one of these machine learning training models. Yeah. So I was basically feeding the wrong data into the model, and I didn't know. And I was off by one day, so I was basically feeding future data into this model that I was training, and didn't know. It was great, and it was really successful. The manager looked at the model, didn't see the issue, so we're like, oh, great, it's super performant. We're gonna put it into production, and then the moment it went in, and it was like, oh, it's not really performing as well as we thought. We spent overnight, 10 hours, didn't sleep, trying to figure out what was going on. Found the thing. I was like, oh my God, it's terrible. It's probably the worst thing I've done. And because it was in a trading firm, there was real money involved.
Oh my gosh.
So fortunately it didn't really lose any money. It just didn't do as well as we hoped on that first pass. So, which is great. The organization worked. It couldn't really mess up that much.
That's hilarious.
That's the worst one I've ever done.
That's hilarious. And it makes me wonder, Michael, how you approach debugging, whether it's a pipeline or a model where things just seem to be going wrong. What tends to be the framework or the process you use?
A lot of times when you're working in code and you're working really abstract, thinking, right? You're moving these things over there, moving data frames and abstract indices and things like that. You don't really look at the data ever. So sometimes just printing that stuff out on a screen and just going, okay, this makes sense. Just going through a few rows, you can actually really easily see the problem. So that's really like a in development thing. And then tools like dbt help you write tests. So starting with tests and cases where you know things might go wrong, and just gradually adding those tests. Basically, if you're starting on the rightmost side, you're like, okay, things are starting to go wrong. You just progressively add those things right to left. I'm making these assumptions with this. I'm making these assumptions with this. Eventually, you're going to find the place where it's like, oh, okay, no, it's all blowing up here. So those two are my go-to tips.
That's super helpful. And I remember I studied computer science in undergrad, so I learned algorithms, and then on top of the algorithms, I learned a whole bunch of different programming languages. But when problems would arise, it would help to go back to the algorithm level, which is a bit more abstracted, and look at the logic in what I was trying to build. And then if all of that was fine, then I could go into the syntax of maybe I put a semicolon in the wrong place or something. But a lot of times the problem was in the logic. The computer will do what you tell it to do, but sometimes we don't tell it the right thing.
Yeah. The thing that's kind of hard with data is that when you're doing a debugging algorithm, you can add these breakpoints and you can walk it through step by step. But it's really hard to do that with something like SQL, right? Because you're just sending this massive amount of data through this thing. You say, hey, the data looks like this. And you're telling it the data looks like this. And
that's true.
It will either run or it won't run, but you can't step through on a row by row or value by value basis. Or it's really hard to, at least. So,
yeah. Michael, as we're talking, I'm thinking about a challenge that data professionals often have, maybe even more so for someone working in a consultancy, which is communicating with stakeholders, especially non-technical stakeholders. How have you met that challenge?
Yeah, it's definitely a really common problem. A lot of it is about framing it. If it's somebody who's very well versed with the domain, but not with the technicals, then it's about framing it in the right metrics. Gotcha. So a lot of times people like to just throw data at people. You really want to be impartial. You want to show them your work. Like, okay, here's step 1 and I did that, and step 2 and step 3, and really walk through your process and then tell them the conclusion. But by that time, you've lost your stakeholder, right? So most of the time you want to start with the conclusion.
Wow.
And framing it in terms of impact. I find that really helpful. So instead of going, we've observed an issue with A, it causes a next second delay in your pipeline, which, degrades performance by Y%. You can say, hey, I found this problem and it will make your team less efficient by, this, or it will, because it runs longer, it's costing you Y dollars every time you're having that framing, being very specific about, okay, what is the thing that you're telling? What is the impact to you?
I've never heard this before, Michael, and I'm intrigued. As someone who often works on big projects, not necessarily data projects, but big projects, I love the unveil, Michael. Come on, man. I want to tell the story. So we started here. It was a dark and stormy night, and we climbed 7 mountains, and this, that, and I fought the dragon, and then voila, unveil the result. You're saying I need to start with the end. I need to start with the conclusion.
One of my first managers was telling me about this kind of things where you can do the full journey if you're really, really confident about your ability as a storyteller. Right? If you really think I can make this dry technical investigation really interesting, then you can. By all means, right? You take them through the process and they're with you all the full step of the way. But think about if it was you. It was 4 p.m. on a Friday, have an hour meeting. I just want to get out of there. I just want to know the thing that you found, how is it going to impact me or my team? Start with a conclusion. And if they already agree with you, then you're done, right? You don't really need to go in through the thing. You just have to tell them, well, what do you need to do next? So, and if they're like, whoa, this, I don't know about this, then that's where you, hey, here's how I walk you through this. And typically they'll have specific objections when they really don't agree with you, and just address those. You save a lot of time.
This is good, Michael. This is good. I love this. Okay, I want to talk a little bit more about this idea of quantifying the value of your data work. Data work is so valuable in just about every industry, and yet it can sometimes be hard to connect it either to the specific cost savings or additional revenue generated or time saved. How do you measure the impact of your work, Michael?
Yeah, I really think it's something that came about in less than the last 10 years, because up to that point, I was joking about having just DBAs, so data people. But later on, you would have people who are data engineers, data analysts, and business analysts in traditional company. But
yes,
those people, their job is putting together reports, right? And this might be the case for a lot of people now too, right? Your main job as a data analyst is to do reports. And in an org and a business sense, your value generation is not at your level. It's at somebody else. So somebody's looking at the dashboard you made and go, oh, okay, I see this really important thing is happening. Let me go react to it and make more money or cut more cost, right? So the value generation is divorced from your part of the org. So in a way, we talk about parts of the company being, or an org being a profit center or a cost center.
Yes.
And when you are framed as a cost center, you're just, your impact is valued by how efficiently you can do things. Eventually, there's always going to be a new tool that comes up, make it more efficient. Now, you might be, you can you can get acknowledged by adopting those tools, but then that becomes a new norm and you have to consistently perform it. Okay, I'm going to make it more efficient, right?
Wow.
And that's tougher. Instead, a big part of the data science world, what really drove that boom is that it's seen as more of a profit center. So because you made the algorithm this much more efficient, I am generating this much more revenue. Or I made the marketing campaign this much more efficient. And because people really got obsessed with the idea of doing product experimentation and A/B tests and multivariate testing and things like that, you need to see if it worked. But a side effect of knowing whether it worked is knowing how much impact you made. So you would know, hey, this experiment worked and I wrote the algorithm that powers it. We did the data model or the segmentation or the insights that drove it. And that delta then becomes your quantifiable impact. So that's why that segment of the market really took off, right? Because you say, hey, I now make this impact. And you can demand nicer, fun, shinier toys, better software, things like that.
I love this. This is great. I've had the opportunity, Michael, to speak with a number of our fellow data professionals in the process of doing this show. I'm learning a ton. A couple of times, Michael, the topic of domain knowledge has come up. So the fact that as data professionals, we're often serving a certain part of the business, a profit center, often whether it's sales or finance or marketing. And I'm curious as to how much you weight the value of domain knowledge.
Yeah, a lot. It depends a little bit on the nature of your work, right? But for a lot of data analysts and even analytics engineers, there's a natural cap to your progression because you don't have enough domain knowledge. The technical skills can only get you so far, and most companies aren't solving that hard a technical problem. Right. Wow. So you're doing reporting, you can do a little bit better. Maybe instead of needing to hire 2 junior folks, they hired you. 1 person, you can do all of the reporting needs, but mostly they're just needing to join some data presenter, make sure their DBT project is running smoothly. There's not a lot of technical difficulties there. In a sense, because it's not that difficult or it's not that complex or they're not putting through that much data, your value to the org is capped at that value. So you cannot contribute more, and therefore you typically can't get more out of it, right? Like pay or comp or whatever you're looking for. Typically then, to be impactful, you need to have a lot of domain knowledge, because or else somebody comes to you and say, hey, can you give me that report? I want these columns. These are the metric definitions.
Yeah.
Or even in the sense that if you have a really, really good project, maybe you only have to do it once. You don't have to do it again. You set up self-serve, you set up a semantic layer really well.
Right.
And that's great, right? Like it's really great. You're doing a great job technically.
Yes.
But from a business standpoint, you're like, okay, great. Have this report. They're not really thinking about how hard or how well structured your project is. Wow. So the domain knowledge is really what helps you gain that little bit more insight. Say, okay, I built the table. I look at it. Oh, that's the most profitable segment.
Dude, this almost makes me think, Michael, of the fact that with little domain knowledge, your job as a data professional could eventually become fixed or defined tasks. where the most you can do is increase efficiency. You said as much. You become measured only on efficiency. How much faster did Michael do the work? Versus as you start to add more domain knowledge, then you could become more effective in creating business value. Maybe they start to bring you in on esoteric and unusual business problems, and you have to design, unusual data solutions to meet those needs.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we internally look at this when we talk to clients or when we look at projects. We look at whether your data org is a service org, which is exactly as you said, you're basically measured on your throughput, right? And in the finance role, you have these like Excel monkey jobs, right? You basically, they'll just do whatever, they'll pull some data, put it on an Excel sheet and send it to you. And that's your job, right? And they can get really, really fast at it. But at some point, you're going to get replaced with a tool, or you're going to be replaced with a better, more well-built extraction system, or eventually somebody would just I'm really tired of waiting for somebody to do it. I'll just do it myself, right? Because and that thing we see happen all the time, right? You install this, your org is now more efficient. I install this new set of tools. I no longer need something, right? Like, hey, I implemented Fivetran across my org. I no longer need 15 people maintaining pipelines. I'm on Snowflake. I no longer need 3 guys making sure my SQL server is up. So it's both a good thing, like you're saying, you want to be brought in almost like an internal consultant when you're like a data specialist, to be brought in to do these really interesting projects where they'll give you the domain knowledge. So they'll be like, hey, here's my problem. Here's why I think about it. Here's the lay of the land. But, I need some data science help to identify something, right? I need to identify these segments, or I want to automate something. I have these ideas, there are these insights, but I want to identify these guys automatically, right?
Right.
A really common product use case, like marketing, would be like identifying your whale users, your highest value users.
Oh, right.
Or estimating LTV. So most of the time people will know, like, okay, my user base has 1% that's driving 80% of the revenue. I can see those users by like just ranking the users by their revenue, right? But then, so I know roughly what they look like. But then, hey, what are some other users that are going to be similar to those? And that's a data science problem that you don't really need the domain knowledge for yet, or people can give you that knowledge. And so those are a lot of use cases that we see as when you have a really good trust, and then maybe the marketing team will bring you in as a data specialist. Like, hey, you want to automate this? I want a workflow around it. Can you build this for me?
I love it. This is great, especially as a marketing person. I'm like, what? Lifetime value? I love it. Tell me who the whales are. This is really cool. Michael, you started out trading items in the video game Diablo, and you've come a long way since. But I wonder, in your mind, what some projects are, maybe a particular project that you're proud of. What's a success story that you could share with us?
Yeah, the more sort of technical problems, they're like interesting to me personally, but they're not like often the more technical, challenging projects. Also because I'm not a research kind of person, they're not necessarily the most impactful. On an org level, the more impactful things tend to be people related. So behavioral change, organization change, right? So when I became a head of data at this startup, it was the first time I set up a tech stack and a data team from scratch. It's a really great experience because you don't really get to do it that often, right? You're a data person. Typically, you go and you inherit something, inherit some amount, like unless you're a consultant type like myself, you don't really migrate people that often, right? You stay at a company, they typically hope to use their data stack 5, 6, 7 years. So if you're staying in a company 10 years, you maybe only encounter one migration.
Gotcha.
So setting something up from scratch was really, and that was kind of also, I was reading a lot at the time. It was kind of during COVID, so everyone had a lot of time on their hands. I got really into reading about DBT, modern data stack stuff. So we were like, okay, well, we have this startup. We have these grand plans of how much throughput we need, but we don't want to spend a lot of time maintaining it. And that's kind of when, so it was the first time I kind of did the very basic kind of stack of Snowflake, Fivetran, DBT, run it. But at the time, it was really super fun. Everyone that we hired never heard of DBT before. Some were experienced data professionals, but never using this kind of stuff before, because before that, we'll just write queries, that the query gets locked in somewhere. There's no version control, teaching people to do like testing, deployment cycles. That was a lot of fun.
I've never even thought of framing it in terms of people change, behavioral change, and the potential impact of that. That for all the data professionals that work with you to build that brand new data stack, to learn DBT and these new technologies, each of them, there's ripples. Each of them will probably then go on to influence other organizations as well. So that is really impactful.
Yeah, that's platform side of things, right? We also, we're using a software that's more holistic and DBT integrated. It's very self-serve first kind of design.
Okay.
We set that up and everything was well integrated. Everything's well documented on the platform itself. So then a lot of people who I worked with later on moved to different companies after that, and they'll be like, oh yeah, we know what self-serve looks like, so I can know how to read documentation. A lot of people learn to write SQL, right? Like sales guys were like, well, I just want to pull this one thing, and then we would always redirect them to here, use a self-serve. And the self-serve thing generated some SQL, and then we'll teach them how to like modify that SQL to get the thing that they want. So people really see the power of having like a well-structured data model, right? Because they're not going to go through 4 or 5 layers trying to figure out where exactly something is. But hey, here's a really well done data mart. They can actually do that themselves. And a lot of people from that group picked up SQL, right? That was kind of fun.
Okay. This is good. I'm going to push you on this one, Michael, though. And I love this story that you've pinned up. Thank you for breaking it down, both on the platform side and then on the stakeholder side. On the stakeholder side, some data professionals feel self-serve is a myth, Michael. I mean, don't at me. I didn't come up with it.
I mean, it isn't. It's just a question of degree. The tools and often the models themselves are not so clean and well defined so that everything can be self-serve. Self-serve really, for me, meant that there's somebody who's supporting the data model, right? So instead of writing 10 dashboards, all slightly different filters, or like going back to this service org kind of representation, you know, you have a bunch of Jira tickets coming in and say, I want this data, I want that data, I want that data. You're just churning them out, right? Yeah. That's a really common reason for people who want to adopt self-serve. I want to get out of this loop. I don't want to be stuck in this service loop. And that was kind of what we did when we started, because we knew we weren't going to have that many people on our team. We want everyone to be impactful. So we didn't want to spend a lot of time serving these kind of problems. So we went for a lot of self-serve, and it's really a lot of organizational things. And we did silly things, right? We ran classes for people. We did like a leaderboard, right? Hey, how many people did their own querying and stuff? And one of our colleagues was really good at teaching, so she had this cute example set up about minions, and you got to find the minions and things. So a lot of it is that kind of stuff.
Yes,
you can't just rely on the tool. You can't just be like, hey, the tool is set up, now go. And then if you imagine everybody's going to flock to it, that's definitely not going to happen. In the same way, not 100% of your questions can be solved by a self-serve tool. And realistically, you also don't want it to, right? Because you don't want to obsolete yourself in a very practical sense. A lot of tools will have these promise, especially more business-oriented tools like HubSpot, for example. So connect all of your data, integrate it into HubSpot, and your sales team will have a perfect picture of and you can use it there, kind of stuff. If that worked, then all you need are integration people or integration platforms.
Yes.
But it's never really the case, because there's still a lot of work involved in putting that thing into that platform. And maybe you're trying to get rid of as much of the boring work as possible. So in HubSpot, for example, when we've done integration before, you try to get like LTV. So instead of them needing to look it up on a dashboard, you have it sent there so that they can see, oh, these are my whale customers. Oh, I have my segmentation built. It automates my funnel building, whatever.
Yes.
But the really complex questions of, hey, we're looking for these few customers, or if the funnel performance isn't working as well anymore, I need to really dig into why. These questions are really hard to self-serve because they're one-off. They typically involve something that's not built into your models. And that's kind of where that model breaks down.
Makes sense. Woo! Man, this is a masterclass, Michael. I can see why you wrote a DBT book. This is really good. Okay, I have to wrap up, but I have a couple of really important questions that I don't want us to skip past. One is around influences or mentors that might have helped you along your data journey? Have you had any of those?
Yeah, I would say my managers at Grab being my first like data job and pretty much the largest tech company in Southeast Asia. There was a lot of stuff that I learned about working in a big organization, a lot of stuff I learned about like what, tech looks like at scale, both the kind of good things and bad things, right? And also a lot of the stuff we were talking about framing things, and sort of storytelling. You gotta, it's not helpful if you've made a really good dashboard. You have to convince people to take action. And these are big work problems, right? Where you really have to convince people to do things. And that was very, very educational for me.
That's great. That's great. Related to that, Michael, for someone who has written a book, has had lots of interesting stops on your data professional career, how would you define professional success?
I mean, there's the very practical side of things, right? Comp and freedom and things like that, which ultimately is the thing that you chase on a famous company and things like that. But for different people, at some point they have enough, whether that's money or lifestyle or freedom. So a lot of people will say, hey, I don't want to work in a full RTO job ever. I've gotten really used to COVID times. I want the ability to work remotely all the time. I want to travel, whatever.
Right.
So at that point, you get to the enough point, then people then prioritize something else. And for a lot of data people get into it because of an interest in it, especially people getting into it around when I did it, because it wasn't a career path. You didn't have an undergraduate in data. Maybe you were a computer scientist, maybe you were was in finance, or maybe you were in statistics, right? It's something that you kind of get into. You kind of prioritize the work itself being interesting while being able to maintain your lifestyle. Right. For me, if you are able to wake up and, hey, I want to do really interesting stuff and I don't have to worry about life, that's the career success for me.
Love it. Very to the point. All right. So Michael, for someone who is aspiring to follow in your footsteps, they're playing Diablo right now, they're trading, they're like, is this it? Is this all I'm ever going to be? What advice might you give to a data professional who's like, I want to do what he's doing?
So this is something that I often have debates about with friends in this field is it harder to get into it nowadays as an entry level? The job market being very tough right now, notwithstanding, right? Gen AI has made entry level data analyst jobs really rare. Because, when I was starting out, data analyst or business analyst jobs were all just data pulling jobs because there was a certain difficulty. People weren't used to it. They didn't really know how to do it. But now Gen AI, whether they're accurate or not, and people debate like, but queries written by Gen AI is bad. It's easier to learn how to write SQL than it is to say, write a really, really long description for a Gen AI thing to write you the right. Well, that's all true, but also most people's asks aren't that complicated. It's like, I just want to know who is XYZ user or how many users did something. And typically those things are not super complicated. And a lot of these Gen AI twin tools are able to do that. So I would say a lot of the traditional data analyst roles are entry-level roles are going away. So it's definitely true. And data analyst is typically the easiest thing to get into. It's typically the most entry-level roles. That's why there's like 1,000 boot camps for it, right?
Gotcha.
So that I would say is true and is tough because it's not a reliable sort of way into the industry anymore. Because a data role is a generalist role in a sense. It's from a business perspective, right? You're like what we're talking about with domain knowledge. The easiest way to be impactful the moment you start at a company, which is also how you get hired and get promoted, is to know what this data is about. And you have some data skills. So separating the skills from the job itself, having those data skills, being able to pull your own data or do some analysis on top of it, visualize it, put it in a presentation is very, very valuable. But you need the domain to make you impactful because you cannot rely on just the technical skills anymore to get you in the door. So if you already have a career kind of or direction you want to go into, you focus on the domain before you focus on the technical skills is probably a better way to get started and get ahead. If you're really getting into the data because you're interested in data as that itself as the niche or the domain, then doing something like analytics engineering, doing something like being very specific about problem space And if you want to do data science or something, even going one step further, picking something you're interested in, building some depth in recommendation models. These days, Gen AI is hot. Maybe Gen AI, RAG, picking something and giving yourself a little bit more of a boost. I think being a little bit more niche is probably a better way to get ahead and get in.
This is really good. This is really good, really good. Well, you've been hearing from Michael Hahn. We might have to call him the Jedi trainer of data professionals, because he's really given some knowledge that's going to help a lot of people. A final question: where do you see yourself career-wise in 5 years?
Well, hopefully, doing interesting projects, right? A lot of people these days are talking about Gen AI, and whether that's a bubble or not, there's a lot of things to explore. So hopefully, at least for the next 5 years, I'm going to be building up some expertise in that. We're working a lot of projects with big companies, implementing those things. Hope something along those lines, I hope.
This is exciting. I sense another book coming out of this, folks. I sense another book. All right, this has been fun. We've been talking to Michael Hahn, head of product at Infinite Lambda in Singapore. He runs the Singapore local DBT meetups, co-wrote the very first Chinese DBT book, and he lived in 10 cities in 5 different countries. Amazing. Michael, thank you for hanging out with us today. All right, folks, thanks for being with us on the Data Career Show. We'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.
This show is brought to you by DBT. DBT is the industry standard for data transformation. It allows your team to prepare data for analysis in a way that's centralized, modular, and entirely open, all inside your cloud data platform. The outcome? Consistently dependable analytics for your organization. Now, the DBT community was built for and by data pros. Come hang out and transform with 70,000 of the brightest analytics engineers, data analysts, and data scientists in the world. With DBT, you transform your data. With the DBT community, you transform your data career.